The stars outside the ship's window glittered like a sea of diamonds, but Queen Selira had no time to admire them. Warning lights flashed red across the command deck. Alarms rang. Her royal transport was under attack. "Shields are gone," shouted one of the crew. The ship shook violently as another enemy blast hit. "Stabilize the descent," Selira ordered, gripping the control panel. The pilots did their best, but the enemy was relentless. Strange, unknown ships surrounded them, firing again and again. The Queen knew they would not make it to safety. She made a decision. "Prepare the emergency pod. I will evacuate alone if needed." The crew hesitated, but her sharp glare left no room for debate. Moments later, the escape pod launched into the void, cutting away from the dying ship. Through a small window, Selira saw her transport explode in a ball of fire. Her loyal crew was gone. The pod streaked through the atmosphere of the nearest planet, shaking like a falling star. It crashed hard into a dense green jungle. Trees broke apart as the pod dug into the soil and finally stopped. Inside, Selira groaned. Her body ached from the impact, but she was alive. She stepped out carefully, scanning her surroundings with a portable device. The air was breathable. The planet was filled with life, most of it primitive. Tall trees stretched into the sky, their leaves blocking much of the sunlight. Strange birds called from above. Insects buzzed around. She could hear the distant roar of some large animal. "This place is wild," she muttered. Her scanner beeped again. It showed no advanced life forms nearby. No cities, no technology. This was a pre-spaceflight world. Selira set up a small energy field around the pod to keep out curious animals. She knew she had to send a distress signal, but her transmitter was damaged. It would take time to repair it, and she needed food and water to survive. As night fell, she felt something strange. Fear. It was not common for her people to feel fear. But here, far from her fleet, she was vulnerable. Hours later, she heard movement outside the energy field. Something was circling her camp. The sound of leaves crunching underfoot grew closer. Suddenly, a huge beast leapt from the shadows, a predator with sharp teeth and glowing eyes. The energy field kept it back, but just barely. The beast growled and scratched at the barrier, testing it. Then from the darkness came another sound, a shout. A man appeared, holding a burning branch in one hand and a spear in the other. His hair was long, his body strong and scarred from many hunts. He yelled again and charged at the beast, waving the fire. The animal growled and backed away, unwilling to face both fire and man. Selira watched in disbelief. This human, this primitive, and had no armor, no energy weapons, no technology at all. And yet he had faced the creature without fear. When the beast finally fled, the man stood still, breathing hard. Then he turned and looked directly at her. For a long moment, they stared at each other through the faint glow of the energy field. The man pointed at the beast's tracks, then at her, as if to warn her that it might return. He pointed at the fire, then to the ground near her pod, suggesting she should keep a flame burning to scare off predators. Selira hesitated. She could stay inside the field and remain safe, for now. But the man's actions intrigued her. Slowly, she deactivated the barrier and stepped closer. The man tensed, gripping his spear, but she raised her hands to show she meant no harm. He said something in his language, words she did not understand, but his tone was calm. He knelt and began gathering dry leaves and sticks, building a fire right there. Soon a warm flame burned beside her crash site. Selira sat near it, watching him work. She had never seen anyone so skilled with such simple tools. He made a shelter from large branches, covering it with leaves to protect against rain. He moved with confidence, like someone who knew this land better than anyone. When the fire was stable, the man stepped back. He seemed ready to leave, but Selira pointed at him, then at the fire, then made a gesture for him to stay. He studied her for a moment, then nodded and sat down on the other side of the fire. The night passed slowly. The jungle was full of sounds, the cries of animals, the rustle of leaves. But no predators came near the fire. Selira found herself studying the man's face. He was different from her people, rough, fierce, but there was something strong and honorable about him. When morning came, he rose and motioned for her to follow. She hesitated, but decided to trust him. He led her through the jungle, showing her edible fruits and clean water sources. He demonstrated how to sharpen a stick into a weapon. Even though she had advanced tools, she found herself listening carefully. His survival skills were incredible. Later that day, her scanner beeped again. Enemy signatures were approaching. The same fleet that had shot her down. They were searching the planet for survivors. Before she could react, the man grabbed her arm and pointed toward a hidden cave nearby. His sharp eyes had seen them coming before her technology did. They hid inside the cave as strange flying machines passed overhead. The man held a finger to his lips, signaling her to stay quiet. Celira's heart pounded. For the first time, she realized that without this human, she might not have survived the night, let alone escape detection. As the danger passed, she looked at him with new respect. This man was no mere primitive. He was a protector, one who had risked his life for a stranger. For the first time since the crash, Celira felt a spark of hope. The jungle was quiet again after the enemy patrols passed. Queen Celira stayed in the cave for a few moments, listening carefully. Her heart still beat fast. She turned toward the man who had saved her twice now. He was watching the entrance, his spear ready in case the flying machines returned. When he saw her looking at him, he gave a small nod as if to say safe now. Celira slowly relaxed. This man had no translator, no way to speak her language, but somehow she could read his intent through his eyes and gestures. She pointed at herself. "Celira," she said clearly. The man looked surprised, then tapped his chest. "Kyle," she repeated the name softly. "Kale." He smiled, the first time she had seen any change in his serious expression. It was strange, but the smile made the cave feel a little warmer. The next few days were spent in careful cooperation. Celira worked on repairing her small transmitter, but the damage was worse than she expected. Kale, meanwhile, brought food, wild fruits, roots, and sometimes hunted meat. Though she had emergency rations, she decided to eat what Kale provided. It was a sign of trust, and it seemed to make him proud. They began to find ways to communicate. Kale would draw shapes on the dirt, animals, trees, enemies, and Celira would add symbols of her own. Slowly, they built a simple language of pictures and signs. One evening, as they sat near the fire, Kale drew the shape of a flying ship and pointed at the stars. Then he pointed at her, then made a questioning gesture. Celira understood. He was asking if she came from the sky. She nodded. Then she used her scanner to project a small blue light, showing a map of stars. Kale's eyes widened in amazement. He touched the light carefully as though it might vanish. Celira pointed at one bright star on the map. "Home," she said. Kale was silent for a while. Then he drew a circle in the dirt, pointed at the ground beneath them, and said a word, perhaps the name of his world. For the first time, Celira felt like they were not strangers anymore, but peace did not last long. On the fourth day, Celira heard the sound of engines. The enemy was back, this time closer than before. Kale heard them too. He grabbed her hand and motioned for her to follow. They moved quickly through the jungle, his steps light and silent. He led her to a narrow gorge hidden by vines. From there, they could see two enemy scouts, tall armored soldiers, searching the area with scanning devices. Kale crouched low, his hand on his spear. Celira grabbed his arm. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. Fighting them would be dangerous. But Kale's eyes burned with determination. He pointed at her, then at the enemy, then made a gesture like breaking something. Celira realized what he meant. If they did nothing, the scouts would find her crash site. The enemy would call reinforcements, and it would be over. She hesitated, then nodded. What followed was a battle unlike any she had ever seen. Kyle crept through the bushes like a shadow. He set traps with vines and sharp sticks. He moved so fast and so quietly that even Celira, watching closely, almost lost sight of him. When one of the enemy soldiers stepped into a trap, Kale struck, his spear hitting a weak point in the armor. The alien fell with a cry. The other soldier turned, firing a plasma shot into the trees. Celira acted quickly, using her damaged blaster to return fire. The shot was weak, but enough to distract the soldier long enough for Kale to leap from behind and knock him down. When it was over, both enemies lay unconscious. Celira looked at Kyle in shock. This man had just defeated two trained soldiers with nothing but his spear and cunning. Kale dragged the soldiers away from the crash site and hid them under branches, preventing the enemy from quickly finding their bodies. Celira helped, though she still felt amazed at his bravery. That night, Celira used the stolen enemy communicator to slow their search grid. She was able to send false signals leading them to a distant part of the jungle. "You helped me save time," she said softly. though Kale could not understand her words. "You saved me again." Kyle simply sat near the fire, sharpening his spear. Selira noticed he had a small wound on his arm from the fight. She opened her medical kit and carefully treated it. Kale watched her with curiosity as the healing gel closed the cut instantly. When she finished, he touched the healed skin and looked at her with a nod of thanks. The days that followed grew more dangerous. The enemy patrols increased. Selira and Kale had to keep moving, hiding in caves, crossing rivers, and staying ahead of the search parties. Through all of this, Selira felt something she had never felt before: reliance on someone else, someone without technology, someone who fought not because of orders but because he chose to. She started to trust Kale completely. On the 7th day, Selira finished repairing her transmitter. She sent a short distress call to her fleet, hoping they would hear it before the enemy jammed the signal. That night, as they camped near a tall cliff, the jungle echoed with the sound of engines again. Many engines. The enemy had found their trail. Kale stood spear ready as Selira checked her scanner. "Too many," she said, though she knew he could not understand. Kale did not move back. Instead, he gathered dry branches and began setting small fires around the camp in a ring. His plan was clear. They would fight, and they would not be easy prey. Selira felt fear again, but she also felt something else: respect. As the enemy lights approached through the trees, Kyle stood like a stone warrior, ready to defend her one last time. Then suddenly, a different sound filled the air, a deep humming from above. Selira looked up and saw a royal ship descending through the clouds. Her rescue had arrived. Kale glanced at her, surprised as the large alien craft landed nearby. The ramp lowered and tall armored guards stepped out, followed by a figure she knew well. The alien king had come, and from the look in his glowing eyes, he was not expecting to see his queen standing beside a primitive human. The royal ship's ramp touched the ground, sending dust swirling through the jungle air. Queen Selira stood tall, her injuries mostly healed, her spirit burning with new strength. Beside her, Kale gripped his spear, staring in silent wonder at the massive craft. From the ramp, the royal guards marched out in perfect formation, their armor shining in the firelight. And then came the alien king himself, tall, powerful, and dressed in ceremonial battle armor. His glowing eyes scanned the scene, and for a moment he froze. He had expected to find his queen frightened, hiding, maybe even begging for rescue. Instead, he saw her standing beside a primitive warrior, both of them armed and ready to fight. "Beloved," the king said, his voice deep and commanding, "step away from this creature. You are safe now." But Selira did not move. "This man saved my life," she replied firmly. "I would not be standing here without him." The king's eyes narrowed. He looked Kale up and down with a mix of disbelief and insult. This hunter? This creature with sticks and fire? Kale did not understand the words, but he understood the tone. His jaw tightened. He did not lower his spear. Selira stepped between them. "He fought the enemy with me," she said. "He faced dangers without armor, without fear. You owe him respect." The guards looked at one another, uneasy. No one had ever heard their queen speak like this before. Before the king could respond, the jungle shook with the sound of approaching engines. The enemy had tracked them here. "Ready positions," shouted one of the guards. The king turned back toward Selira. "Get inside the ship. My soldiers will handle this." "No," Selira said, her voice hard. "Kyle and I will fight with you." The king stared at her, shocked. "You would fight beside him?" "Yes," she said, "because I trust him." The enemy broke through the tree line. A dozen armored soldiers, more than Kale and Selira had ever faced before. Plasma shots lit up the jungle as the royal guards formed a defensive line. Kyle did not wait for orders. He ran forward faster than anyone expected and hurled his spear at the nearest soldier. It struck true, knocking the enemy back. Then he dived behind a fallen log as blaster fire rained down. Selira grabbed one of the guards' spare weapons and joined the line. Her aim was true, her shots precise. She fought like someone reborn, no longer the queen who sat on a throne, but a warrior who had lived through fire and fear. Kale moved like the jungle itself, striking from the shadows, disappearing, then striking again. He used traps he had prepared earlier, spiked pits and swinging logs, to take down several enemies at once. The king watched this with growing astonishment. This man, with no technology at all, was turning the battle in their favor. After several minutes of fighting, the enemy leader stepped forward, larger than the others, his armor glowing red. He aimed his weapon at Celira. Before the shot could fire, Kale appeared from the trees, leaping onto the leader with a roar. The two crashed to the ground. Kyle wrestled with him, dodging blows until he grabbed a sharp stone and drove it into the weak point of the enemy's armor. The leader fell silent. The remaining enemy soldiers hesitated, then fled into the trees, defeated. Silence returned to the jungle. The fire crackled softly. Kale stood, breathing hard, his body covered in dirt and sweat. He retrieved his spear and turned toward Celira, as if to check if she was safe. Celira smiled, not the smile of a queen, but of a friend. "You did it," she said softly. The king walked forward slowly. His expression was unreadable. "This human," he said finally. "He fought like a soldier. No, like a king defending his own land." Celira nodded. "He fought for me. Not because of orders, not because of duty, but because it was right." Kale looked between them, not knowing what they said, but sensing the tension. The king stopped in front of Kale. For a moment no one moved. Then, to everyone's surprise, the king lowered his head slightly, a gesture of respect among his people. Kyle blinked, unsure, but then gave a small nod of his own. "You have my thanks," the king said. "Without you, my queen would not have survived." Celira translated as best she could, pointing to Kale and then touching her heart. Kyle understood enough to give a small smile. Later, as the royal ship prepared to leave, the king offered Kale a reward. Through Celira, he promised him treasure, tools, even a place among the stars. Kale listened quietly, then shook his head. He pointed at the jungle, at his hunting spear, and at the rising sun. "He refuses," Celira said softly. "He wishes only to remain here in his home." The king was silent for a long time. "A man who refuses power is a rare man indeed," he said at last. Celira approached Kale and pressed a small silver device into his hand. "If you are ever in danger," she said, "activate this. We will come." Kyle closed his hand around it. He did not speak, but his nod said everything. As the ship rose into the sky, Kale stood at the edge of the clearing, watching. The firelight reflected in his eyes. When the ship disappeared among the clouds, he turned back toward the jungle. There was hunting to do, traps to reset, a life to live. But somewhere deep inside, he knew that the stars now held his name, and in a distant ship among those stars, a queen smiled proudly, whispering the name of the man who had saved her. "Kyle," she said softly, "protect her."